this specific anime, who in your life kind of represents that character. It creates those little schemas for them to be like, oh, I know how to interact with you because this is how you're going to interact with me. Therefore, I can feel a lot less anxious in these social situations or these social groups or a group project or something else.
The Venn diagram between neurodivergent people and people who self-identify as geeks is probably a bit closer to a circle than many would like to admit. Today, on episode 117, we'll answer the question, how can we leverage the geeky interests of neurodivergent youth to implement strengths-based support in the mental health setting, school, and home? We'll be talking to clinical psychologist Dr. Anthony Bean, founder of Geek Therapeutics, and get his take on how to put all of this into practice. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity Podcast.
It's been about a month since my newest book, Raising Twice Exceptional Children, a handbook for parents of neurodivergent gifted kids, was released. If you haven't had a chance to get your copy, you can find it online today through Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or the Routledge Publishing website. Another way to support the book is to request your local library to order a copy for their shelves. Thank you to those of you who have reached out to offer your feedback and share that you've been helped by the ideas and strategies shared in the pages. I love hearing that people are connecting with the book. We'll geek out with Dr. Anthony Bean next.
Hi, I'm Dave Morris, the executive producer of this podcast. Putting together something like this is a huge endeavor, from planning and booking guests to putting together the finished product to buying equipment, even traveling to get the stories we present. It's a lot of work. As twice exceptional parents of 3 2E kids, my wife Emily and I wanted to start this podcast so we could share our experiences and help others along the way. So my request is this. If you get some benefit from our podcast, would you consider becoming a Neurodiversity Podcast patron? Just $1 or $2 a month can really add up, and not only would you be helping defray costs, you become eligible for some members-only perks. Listening to our podcast is a free experience, and it always will be. Chipping in will help us continue bringing compelling content to listeners around the world. Go to patreon.com/neurodiversity or go to neurodiversitypodcast.com and click support at the top of the page. And thanks.
You're listening to the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
Our guest today is Dr. Anthony Bean. Dr. Bean is a licensed clinical psychologist and the author of Integrating Geek Culture into Therapeutic Practice, The Clinician's Guide to Geek Therapy. So, Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So here's my first question. I'm just going to put this right out there. So are you a geek?
It's a hard one to answer. Yes.
So what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean to be a geek or part of geek culture?
So I've been a geek since I was like 3 years old. One of my earliest memories is actually like playing the NES or NES, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And that's hands down it's Adventure Island is the game itself. I still own it and I've cleaned it out and it's in good condition. It's in a nice safe case in my home. But basically someone who is a geek, it really, really loves some sort of cultural artifact is what we call them. Whether that's anime, that's video games, that is D&D, or some sort of role-playing, maybe conventions, fan fiction, or even cosplay. And those people are really, really passionate about their hobbies, and there's other ideas of who they are. And it creates a center idea of what we call self-expression, but also an idea of who they are as a person. And that's what we are. Even right now, I'm wearing a Legend of Zelda shirt that's made in Japan because I had it shipped on over from there because Legend of Zelda is my favorite video game of all time. I had to pay a lot of money for this shirt, but it's amazing.
Right. And it's authentic. It's like,
it's authentically Japanese, which is what, that's my, what do we call it? Our boon to the idea of like, this is how I know I'm really into this. My cred.
And so everybody else knows too.
Exactly. They know I'm wearing this shirt. You guys can't see it as well, but it's green and wonderful.
So we're both clinicians and working with clients. And I know I'm always looking for ways to connect with my clients. And I always joke that I know way too much about Minecraft and Pokemon just because I wasn't into them growing up, but I hear from my clients all the time. And the techniques that you talk about really leverage those interests and use them therapeutically. So talk a little bit more about this process and why it works.
We'll use Pokemon because we have that Psychology of Pokemon book that's coming out soon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's really, really jam-packed with awesome psychological material and why the game is so important to someone of my age who's played most of them, but also to my 5-year-old son who I now get to play and share that shared interest with him. Although Arceus is a little too advanced for him at this moment. And so I get to play that one. I'm like, yes, new Pokemon game. Basically, the idea is when we look at a cultural artifact, we can then break it down into what people like, what people don't like. And then we could just take it a step further of how can we integrate that into some sort of therapeutic feedback or therapeutic endeavor in a capacity. So Pokemon's really, really great because you have pocket monsters and you have the ability to use them to fight. You have the ability to use them to manage the world around you, but you can hold them and you can control them. It all starts off with the running into the wild and there's chaos everywhere. And then you slowly bring order to the world around you. And you would do that by capturing these little monsters that then go and stick up for you. They fight for you. They create social endeavors. They create a wonderful family. But you can also use them to fight depression symptoms or anxiety or other types of ideas that kind of show up in our life. One of our big things that we really like to do is with a kid who's really into Pokemon and focusing on a lot of really, really neat aspects of it. And they're like, I really like this Gengar. And I like Gengar because he just goes around and scares everyone and everything along those lines. We then, all right, well, let's use Gengar. Let's talk about like what was a time in your life this past week that had, you got a little nervous in school or something like that. And you just shut down and everything just went that way. We can use that image, that metaphorical image of Gengar to be like, were you having a Gengar moment? Were you embodying Gengar? Or was this moment so scary that your Gengar couldn't overtake it? And so maybe we need to switch our Pokemon. Maybe we need to switch our tactics. That's just a really simplistic way to get them to do it. But you can also have them draw out a Pokemon of something that's scaring them. You can have them put it over on the wall somewhere, and you can have them throw like a metaphorical ball at them, a little stress ball at it, and be like, all right, you've caught it. This thing now works for you. How are you going to be able to do that? I think it's one of the best ways that pop culture and geek culture really allows us to do it. It doesn't say this thing is bad or this thing is good. It says this thing needs to be incorporated in some capacity. And so even a lot of the animes that we watch, they come in and they like to talk about it's just because let's say we have a demon inside of us. Naruto does a great job of this. Tokyo Ravens is the one that I'm watching for one of my clients right now. They also have a half ogre in that idea. And one of the big things that came up for the sage is what we call them is like the elder that we have to listen to is they uncoupled the ogre's half ogre's ability to just keep it at bay. Like, so you guys are on opposite ends of the wall. They're trying to bring it closer to be like, this is something that you can control. This is something that you can make sure that you are doing in order to utilize that in your own capacity. And that's just what we do. We find out what the interests are. We use them to our benefit. And then we also then pass that on to our clients who do amazing things with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of incorporating creative use of those interests and gives kids a sense of ownership and meaning to what we're doing, as opposed to like, oh, here's this coping skill in this nice little box. I'm going to give it to you. You do this thing. And it's like, there's no buy-in.
You're 100% correct on that. It allows us to be able to bring it a step further. So a lot of a traditional psychotherapy is like, all right, let's CBT. Let's change that irrational fear. Let's do this other type of thing. Let's do this. And this one, it's like, how can we incorporate this into you and use it to your benefit? Because just because it's scary doesn't mean it has to control you.
I was talking to a parent recently, and I was joking about, I don't remember, probably Minecraft or something or maybe it was also like Harry Potter or some of these things. And she looked at me, she looked kind of confused, and she goes, I thought you talked about like feelings. And I go, yes, that's what we're doing, but it's in a different context. And it could be anything from video games, like you mentioned, to tabletop games or role-playing games. Tell me a little bit about how different games might lend themselves to different types of therapy or connection.
It's a great thing. So I have one in my office. It's called Beast the Balance. I actually saw it at one of the conventions that we go to, and I played this game for probably about 30 minutes. And I was like, this is a great mindfulness exercise in this capacity. And it comes with a free app and everything along those lines. And you can do really cool stuff with it. Whereas you can time yourself, you can go against each other, you can work as a team. I actually use it with some of my couples clients as well, enforcing them to work as a team. And you guys have to take turns. You guys have to communicate. And what happens when we don't communicate? All of those different types of things can have a different type of meaning. One of the big things that we see in our field is that there are apps out there. There's all sorts of things and games that people are creating. And one of the two things that usually happens is it's either very heavy on psychological material and not very engaging, or it has no psychological material and super engaging. So one of the big things that I always like to say is you don't have to create a game to be therapeutic. You can if it's done the right way, and you have like people who are game developers and then psychologists or mental health workers, master's level clinician, doesn't matter what designation you have. It's you have the training to be able to say, this is what makes it therapeutic. And that is where that idea of change comes in. So whether we use D&D for social skills or we use Changeling the Lost, which is a World of Darkness series of RPGs for trauma, because it does a wonderful job of changing the idea of trauma from this thing that kind of like, oh my gosh, my parents died on this one. It's like, no, the Fae kind of did something. It's a supernatural power that you have to try to get this back. And it kind of hides the trauma in a really amazing way that you can then utilize it in a therapeutic setting.
I think it's just really powerful to think about all of those applications. You know, you're able to kind of externalize it and process those things in a safe way. And I think a lot of times it's just hard to talk about stuff in therapy, especially for young people. Mm-hmm. You know, they're sitting in a room and there's like maybe this adult there and it's like, tell me all of the things that are wrong with your life.
Tell me why you did this at school. And you're like, if someone was to come up to me on the street and be like, why did you throw that away? Be like, who are you and what's happening? What is going on? I'd be like Dwight from The Office. Like, what is happening?
Beyond even just the therapeutic setting, there are a lot of parents and educators who are listeners to our show. And I'm thinking that there are probably a lot of ways that people could integrate this into just their relationships, kind of like you mentioned with, for example, couples. So how can you see the benefits for people using some of these same philosophies in other areas of life, like school, like at home?
You're hitting on a lot of our fun stuff of what we actually talk about with our parents. We're almost done writing the book on how to be a geek parent or parenting geek children and stuff. So I just read the conclusion again today. And so we're like month away from being able to start interior work of it, which I'm super excited. So it talks about all this stuff, no matter what you do. The whole idea that comes around it is communication and being able to foster the different experiences. Whether, let's say you are, let's use Avatar: The Last Airbender as an example, because that's very, very popular. Whether you identify as air and your son identifies as fire, you know, they're kind of opposites on a lot of levels. How do you then relate to them? Well, you can watch the anime together and see how Zuko and Aang go in and figure it out at the end, but it focuses on the communication ability. And when we look at any sort of geek culture or cultural artifact, the goal is for us as parents is to just kind of understand it just enough so we can relate to it in a different capacity, whether it's watching anime with our kids or if it's playing a video game with our other kids in some capacity, or maybe watching a YouTube video or doing something that's in their interests. I think one of the biggest things that we see working in this field is that parents come in and they're like, I don't know what they're talking about. And it becomes very, very apparent quick, because then you start asking certain very distinct questions towards the kid in front of us, and the kid's lighting up, explaining why Beyblade's so really cool and how this one transitions to a strong versus a defense type and all this other type of information. And the parents' eyes are just glazed over. And you're like, this is the main issue that we're talking about here. This kid is super excited about it. We should be fostering this type of thing because it creates different ideas of being able to foster experiences that are mimicking life. Sometimes we have to be on the defense. Sometimes we have to be on the attack. And sometimes we just have to be where we are and stalwart in our ideas of what we are. But it forms a really easy avenue for us to, one, relate to our kids, but also give metaphorical experience to them that they know how to handle different situations as they kind of come on up.
You know, as you're talking, I'm imagining the process that game makers go through as they're creating these things, and they are probably informing themselves very much from the fields of psychology and philosophy. And then we're then taking that and then inform, like kind of full circle, taking it and then informing the therapy and figuring out, you know, how to kind of integrate those interests. I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And a lot of the game manufacturers for RPGs, if you go to a convention, whether it's a Comic-Con in LA or San Diego or any of the PAXs that we are usually at, you see all these game makers and they come in and they're like, I want to know how my game can help change the world. Their main goal is not necessarily to be like, I want to be the one that sells the most games out there. Their main goal is, how can I have someone enjoy something that is coming out of my creativity? And we go to these cons and we're like, you want us to review your game? You want us to play with it? We'll do it for you. And then we'll give you a YouTube video, which you can then use on your website to say, this has been reviewed by Geek Therapeutics. We have utilized it in this capacity. We find it to be very fruitful in these different types of endeavors versus, we have a writer on staff who's a game master, and he's been for like 25 years. And he writes these amazing one-shots for D&D therapeutic groups. And they're made to be like within 45 minutes, and then with a 10-minute decompression of like, what can we use? And they're so detailed for a therapist or a parent to be able to like, here's what you want to pay attention to in this encounter. You want to pay attention to these specific details and guide your players through this combat. And you always have the opportunity to have 3 different distinct routes in combat versus it's you actually fight, you flee, or you find a peaceful solution. We always make sure that we have those 3 there because you never know what your group's going to choose. And sometimes they have to go and figure it out themselves.
There's such an overlap in neurodivergent and geek cultures for a variety of reasons. Talk a little bit about the intersection that you see with neurodiversity and the work that you do.
We see a lot of blooming individuals is what I'm going to call them because they don't know what they really want to do yet. And if anyone has ever either had a child that is neurodivergent or worked with them, you know that normal things don't make sense all the time and that we have to take it steps further. Neurodivergence is actually one of my favorite populations to work with because the way that they think is just so unique, and it's most of the time logic based in with the teenagers. And if I can beat their logic, I play a lot of chess.
Yes,
if I can beat their logic, I can work with them in a capacity and make them bloom even faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have them play these games, they are able to project themselves onto a character that is not some sort of video game or anything like that, but also embody that character in a lot of different capacities. And they get to try to either bash this door down and they fail, and they have to be like, well, I shouldn't fail. I'm strong. And you're like, well, your dice say otherwise right now. So let's work on what's another solution. It helps break apart the mentality that there's only one way to go about this. And I think that's a big aspect. It allows them to play a different character, to be a different person in a lot of different capacities, and have the ability to express themselves in ways they may or may not have even known that they could do. We also see a lot of the neurodivergent population, at least here in Texas, coming out as non-binary. Mm-hmm. And
yes.
D&D and RPGs are an amazing capacity for us to be able to be like, well, who do you want to be? Well, I want to be a girl. Can I be a girl? I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever you want. What you can even use they, them if you want. If you wish to be completely non-binary, it provides a really great safe space for them to be able to hone in on a capacity that they don't get in the real world, and helps them try out a lot of different ideas. We've had people, children, adolescents, go through the entire phase of they're biologically male and they want to try out female. And then at the end of these different campaigns, they're like, I actually want to be like just non-binary because I like aspects of both. And we're like, let's do this. What are your pronouns? How can we incorporate this? How can we encourage this in a way that is safe, but also allows you to figure out what's the right thing for you?
Having that space to explore all of those different aspects is something that is often, for neurodivergent people, they're frequently put in this situation where you have to fit in this mold. You have to mask. You have to act this particular way.
Or only this treatment works.
Yes. Yeah. And to just give them that flexibility and that, I don't know, that space and how they can interact with others, in a different way.
One of the best things, honestly, that I've also seen for the neurodivergent community is anime. And the reason is because anime has a cathartic expression. Here in our culture, we talk about like what, if you go through like normal ABA realms and stuff like that, and I have major issues with ABA, most of us do. And then we have some really promising individuals coming out of ABA that are not really practicing those same standardized ideas, but still incorporating the stuff that helps us learn, like we've already kind of briefly talked about. But anime in itself allows someone to see the facial expression and be like, I know what that person's feeling, because it's so overt in a different way. Us as therapeutic individuals, we can then be like, oh, cool. So you know what these different tropes mean for you, and you know how to incorporate them into your world and how these different ideas really work. Who in this specific anime, how does this character, who in your life kind of represents that character? It creates those little schemas for them to be like, oh, I know how to interact with you because this is how you're going to interact with me. Therefore, I know how to do this, and I can feel a lot less anxious in these social situations or these social groups or a group project or something else, to be able to have that conversation and be able to really focus in on what are our goal-oriented stuff without having a lot of the neurodivergence hopefully get in the way.
Another facet of your work has been about creating specifically continuing education for clinicians to integrate this type of therapy into their practice.
Yes, so we run Geek Therapeutics. We're approved by APA, NBCC, ACE, and recently Association of Play Therapy. All of our courses are being revamped specifically to incorporate that play aspect very heavily as much as we can, so we can start getting all of them handled as well. One of the big things that we actually saw going through our own programming and daily life, because I also run a nonprofit here in Texas, is that I was getting about three calls a week saying, can you present on this topic? Can you do this type of thing to our association? And this is literally across the world. We've done stuff in almost every country at this point. And we then started saying, why don't we just standardize this for a lot of people to be able to say, oh, if I want to learn about anime, I can go and take these courses. If I want to learn a little bit more about RPGs, take the Therapeutic Game Master course. If I want to involve myself in understanding video games from a cultural perspective, and also a really unique way of working with video gamers that is not judging and is not necessarily based upon the addiction model, this is where we really want to be focusing on. That is where all of this kind of came and was born out of. And so a very rigorous but fun training.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you will not see anything else like it out there.
That's basically online. They're virtual courses, a lot of them, right?
Yeah. So all of them are virtual because we started this during our wonderful pandemic. And we have hopes that in the next couple of years, we'll do an actual physical conference, but we're also at about 9 conventions a year across the United States. So we're at the 3 PAXs, one up in Seattle, one in Philly, and then the other one at Boston. Then we're at a bunch of fan expos throughout the US as well. And we just go around and we have really cool stuff that is therapeutic in nature, and we sell it to people, whether you're a therapist or not. And we also talk with you about what does it mean to be a geek, and how can we fly our geek pride colors fine and have a lot of fun doing it, because it's not a hobby to be shamed shamed anymore like it was when I was in high school. It's cool to be a geek now.
As we wrap up, this is kind of actually what I wanted to ask you about. A lot of our young clients, they might have some of these areas of interest, some of these passions, but their peers might not be interested in them. And there might be some shame associated with different things. So if you were talking to one of those clients who's struggling to kind of find their identity, find their place, and push back against some of those other pressures or comments that people might make, what would you tell them? What advice would you give?
The biggest thing is, what is your metaphorical shield? Whether it's Legend of Zelda's Hylian shield, which is one of my favorite ones to use, is let's hike up that shield and use that to kind of like reflect it so it doesn't come on the inside on a lot of levels. But it's also, usually if someone's making fun of us in some capacity, it's because of an inability in their eyes to understand who we are and what we can do in this world. If we can incorporate the different geekdom in what we like into our world and make it so we can understand it, the sky's the limit. Just because someone else doesn't like what we do or has an idea that is contrary to what we believe doesn't make it wrong. It's not as black and white as that type of thinking. And if they're not the right person to share that with, that's okay too. That's their own, what we call projection upon you, that you embody everything that they think should be made fun of or that they don't understand. That's on them. That's their idea of the world. And I can tell you as a former geek in high school and going through all that stuff of being a mix between playing soccer for the high school team, but also part of the geek nerdy culture, it was a hard thing to traverse. But I can tell you all the other people who were on the soccer team, they fizzle out. And I can tell you right now, the geeks rule. The geeks rule the world in so many different ways.
That's so true.
So stay strong, hike up the shield, and you can make this happen.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you so much.
I saw a tweet recently from @NeuroWonderful that labeled the 5 neurodivergent love languages: info dumping, parallel play, support swapping, please crush my soul back into my body, and I found this cool rock button leaf, etc., and thought you would like it. It's true that many neurodivergent people connect in ways that neurotypical folks wouldn't exactly understand. Just today, I was talking to a client about their favorite fictional character and how that character manages feelings of sadness and depression. Using their geeky passion led us to a great conversation about how some of those strategies could be applied to their own life. I love that geekiness is so much more widely accepted than it used to be. We can embrace geekiness to foster connection, rapport, and trust, even if it isn't our own flavor of geekiness. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Thanks again to Dr. Anthony Bean for making all of geekdom feel vindicated. We have more details about him and his book on the episode 117 page of our website, neurodiversitypodcast.com. Thanks to the new Patreon patrons who have joined with others to help defray some of the costs of doing what we do. Check out patreon.com/neurodiversity if you can chip in $1 or $2. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. The executive producer and post-production editor is me, Dave Morris. And until next time, thank you for listening. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.